Hello and welcome to Precon Decon, the video series where I deconstruct the pre-constructed decks of Magic the Gathering's history. This video we're going to look at the second part of the Elves versus Goblins duel deck, and the second part is, as you can probably imagine, it's the Goblins, which is a mono-red deck. Let's have a look at the deck list. So we've got whole big old whacking 30 creatures, whole bunch of goblins, and then we've got 2 enchantments, 3 instants, 1 sorcery, and 24 lands. So we've got more creatures in here than the Elf deck, which had slightly more non-creature spells, but the elves had more ways of making elf tokens, so we'll see how the goblin deck kind of matches up against it. And then we've got mana curve off to the side there. So let's dive in, start looking at it. So the face card with the nice foil artwork is Siege Gang Commander, which is an absolutely fantastic card. It's a nice reprint from Onslaught block. And I'd say even by today's standards, I think it's pretty solid as a card. So 5 mana for a 2/2. When it comes to play, you make 3 goblins, and you can pay 1 and a red, sacrifice a goblin, and it basically does shock. It does 2 damage to anything. Really, really nice, I think. The fact it makes 5 powers worth of stuff for 5 mana anyway is okay, and like this ability to turn any goblin into a shock for 2 mana, I think is really, really strong. And I think it would really help in this game. You're doing elves versus goblins, like to either pick off annoying little utility elves or to like push through like the final bits of damage to to finish off the opponent. So yeah, really, really like Siege Gang Commander. Really happy that it's the foil face card. And then we've got Ib Halfheart, Goblin Tactician. So from what I remember, I don't think the Elf deck had a legendary creature. So yeah, the Goblins get a little advantage, I suppose, in that regard. So Ib Halfheart is pretty fun. He's a sort of a minor lore character. I think he's shown up in some flavor text over the years. But yeah, so 3 in a red for a 3/2. Whenever another Goblin you control becomes blocked, it gets sacrificed, and if you do, it does 4 damage to every creature blocking it, which is, I think, a really fantastic ability. So it's just like, you can't chump block my goblins because they're just going to blow up and explode and do 4 damage, which is not an insignificant amount of damage. That kills basically most of the elves in the elf deck. And you can sacrifice 2 mountains to make 2 goblin creature tokens. So Ib is also really, really good. I actually wouldn't mind if Ib had been the foil face card actually, but I get they probably wanted the like the mirrored pair of Ambush Commander and Siege Gang Commander. But yeah, Ib I think is really nice. Like this ability is really really solid. It does mean though that like if you attack with like bigger goblins, like they get sacrificed regardless whether they would die or not. They're always going to get they're always going to explode basically. So there is the chance like you attack with like some of your better goblins, they get chump blocked by an elf token, they blow up anyway. So yeah, but if you're attacking with just a bunch of little goblin tokens, really fantastic, absolute win-win. And they've got a Skirk Fire Marshal. So this is kind of like the mirror to the Voice of the Woods, who was in the Elf deck. This is like from the Onslaught block. It's like the tap 5 Lord, essentially. So Skirk Fire Marshal, 5 mana for a 2/2, protection from red. You tap 5 untapped goblins you control, does 10 damage to everything, which is obviously a huge amount of damage. That basically clears the board. And it's a huge amount of damage to each player as well. And I used to think this ability was, I mean, it is really, really strong, right? But the thing is, like, the elf deck has got like quite a bit of life gain in it, whereas this, being mono red, has none. So I mean, you could obviously do this like if you're ahead on the board anyway, and like there's a bunch of elves. Like this is like a panic button. You just kind of clear the board, do a bunch of damage to each player. But I don't know. I think it's like a really big, risky play. I suppose that makes it very red in the fact that it is a big, risky move to make. I don't know how often you'd be able to, get the ability off and like it work out really well for you. But again, I suppose it's one of these things where like it's better. At least he survives, so like you could tap 5 goblins who are going to die to the effect anyway, and then clear the board, and maybe then the Skirk Fire Marshal swings in for 2, or you got some hasty goblins in here, you do that, and attack. Then after clearing the board, maybe I don't know, but yeah, I think it's okay. Better to have it and not need it, I suppose. And then we've got a single Gem Palm Incinerator, 2 in a red for a 2/1. It has cycling for 1 in a red. When you cycle, it does X damage to a creature where X is the number of goblins play. Pretty much like all the Gem Palm creatures from Onslaught block, these are almost always better when they get cycled. Because, like, for 2 mana, this is at instant speed. It can't be countered, and not that it matters against the green deck anyway. It doesn't have any counter spells, but it's not a spell; it's an ability. it's instant speed, you draw a card and potentially do a bunch of damage to a creature at instant speed. So yeah, like all the gem pumps, really, really solid. I mean, you can play it as a 2/1, but it's like 3 mana for a 2/1. Definitely always cycle this one. This is essentially a unofficial non-creature spell in the deck, really. So yeah, really like gem palm incinerator. Goblin War Chief, this absolute all-star from Onslaught block, is really interesting actually because all the colors got a War Chief, and it was tied to a main tribe. But Elves didn't get a War Chief. Instead, for the green one, it was Beasts got a War Chief, and it like made Beast spells one less to play, and it gave Beasts like regeneration. Not sure why Elves didn't get a War Chief. Maybe I don't know they thought they didn't really need it. But yeah, the Goblin War Chief is really, really strong. So 1 double red for a 2/2 makes all your goblins one less to play or cast even, and all your goblins have haste, which is really, really strong actually for 3 mana. So yeah, really, really fantastic. Would have loved there to be 2 of these in here, but one, it's again better to have one than none, I suppose. But yeah, really, really solid. And there's a fair amount of tutoring as we're going to see in the deck that can help get this out. We've got a single reckless one. 3 in red for an XX, has haste and power toughness each equal to number of goblins in play, so very similar to the heedless one from the elf deck. That had trample, and I'm not going to go into my whole rant about haste only mattering on the turn you play it. But this obviously, playing mono red, you're probably going to be like using a bunch of burn to clear the board. I say like the Skirk Fire Marshal, then you could cast this and then swing with it. I don't know, maybe that's the thing. I think the heedless one is better just because it has trample, which obviously goes better with having a high power and toughness. But like this isn't terrible either, obviously. Right, then the tutoring options I talked about. So we've got single Goblin Matron, 2 in a red for a 1/1. When it comes in play, set your library for a Goblin, reveal it, put into hand. If you do shuffle, it's the most straightforward tutor, I suppose. Again, would have been nice maybe to have more than one of these, but like it's still okay. This gets basically all the key goblins you want. Most of the time, I would say Siege Gang Commander. Goblin Ringleader, 3 in a red for a 2/2 with haste. When it comes to play, you reveal the top 4 cards of your library, and all the goblins go into hand, and the rest go on the bottom of your library. You've got 30 goblins in the deck, so not excluding this one, so 29. So a really good chance this is going to potentially get like 1 or 2. It is potentially, because there's a card similar to this in the elf deck, the Sylvan Messenger, because this is from the same cycle back in Plane Shift. It is potentially a draw 4, and then it's a 2/2 haste, which is really nice. It can immediately swing once you've got its effect off. So yeah, I think this is quite nice. And then 2 Skirk Drill Sergeants, this is a weird thing I think to double up on, have multiple copies of. So 1 red for a 2/1, so Goblin Piker stats immediately, so not dreadful anyway. So when it or another goblin dies, you can pay 2 in a red. If you do, you reveal the top card of your library. If it's a Goblin permanent card, it goes straight into play. Otherwise, it goes into your graveyard. So this is potentially quite nice. There's obviously the chance it whiffs completely. I don't think there's any way of like manipulating the top card of your deck anyway, unfortunately. But I mean, it's still potentially this could be like a really clutch moment, right? Like have a little goblin token dies, and then you pay the 2 in the red, and then you flip over, and it's like I don't know, like Skirk Fire Marshal or like the Siege Gang Commander or something. So I think like potentially quite fun, and like it is optional. You don't have to do it, I suppose. It's okay, but yeah, I do think it's maybe a bit weird. There's 2 of them in here. I would have liked to say like 2 of the War Chief instead, maybe. Right, the only non-goblin creature in the deck, Click Slither. So 1 and triple red for a 3/3 with haste. You can sacrifice a goblin to give it +2/+2 and trample 10/10. So this is kind of like a potential win condition. Speaking from bitter experience, having played with and against this goblin deck when I got the set many years ago. For this to come down, like maybe after the elves have like swung out and stuff. You play Click Slither, sacrifice a bunch of goblins, and just swing with like this huge nightmare in xenomorph insect just out of nowhere. It can just come out of nowhere and just get a win, just really surprisingly. So really nice inclusion. I do wish it was a goblin. Like if it had been reflavored to be a goblin in some way, but it is what it is. But yeah, it's still cool. It's just because if it was a goblin, then you could tutor it up and stuff, and it'd be this whole thing. But it's not. It's this very cool xenomorph insect instead, which is still fun. Single Goblin Sledder, 1 red mana for a 1/1. You can sacrifice a goblin to give a creature +1/+1 to end turn. This is okay, I suppose. Like if you swing with a bunch of goblins, some of them get blocked. I don't know, maybe sacrifice the ones who are going to die anyway to pump up the ones who are getting through. That's possible, I suppose. Skirk Prospector. Oh, it's hard to say. 1 red mana for 1/1. You can sacrifice Goblin to give you 1 red mana. Fine, a little bit of burst, I suppose. Kind of red's equivalent of Llanowar or Elves, I suppose. Like, obviously not as good, but you know, again, better than nothing, I suppose. If you just need that extra boost to get in there. A single Flame Wave Invoker, 2 in red for a 2/2. You can pay 7 in red to have it deal 5 damage to target player. Really expensive ability, and I mean, I did because like goblins and elves both play very quickly. It's very unlikely I think you would actually be able to get this down and like pop that ability off at 8 mana. Like the game's probably almost going to be over by turn 8, But it's like, again, it's better to have it and not need it, I suppose. But again, I would have liked this to be something else, maybe. Single Mog Fanatic, the classic, 1 red mana from 1/1. Sacrifice do 1 damage to target creature or player. A big victim of when combat damage stopped using the stack, because you could do the trick of block or attack with him and then put his combat damage on the stack and then sacrifice him, do an extra 1 damage or something. I mean, he's still great. He's still like a little free little ping ability, I suppose. Yeah, it's okay, but not he's fallen from grace, unfortunately. And then 2 Mud Button Torch Runners, 2 in red for a 1/1. When it dies, does 3 damage to to a creature or player, which again is fine. Actually goes really nicely with Ib, I think. If this gets blocked, it gets sacrificed, does 4 damage to things blocking it, and then it does another 3 damage. So really nice. So there is like obviously, as there usually is with goblins, kind of like a sacrifice theme, but as we're in mono red, we don't really have any recursion to keep it going. And as you kind of seen, there's not a lot of ways of making goblin tokens. Siege Gang makes tokens, Ib makes tokens, but we haven't got anything else really. And then we've got 3 Emberwild Augurs, 1 red for a 2/1. You can sacrifice it and it does 3 damage to target player, but you can only do that during your upkeep. Comes from a whole cycle of Augurs who are in Future Sight, I want to say. It's okay. Again, it's like Goblin Piker stats, like 2 for a 2/1. And then this ability, if it does stick around. Like, again, 3 damage is not insignificant. It does all add up. Very odd you've got 3 of them, really. But yeah, I guess it is what it is. It's so weird to have 3 because this could easily been 2 and then you have 2 of something else. But yeah, it is what it is. And then a single tar pitcher, 3 in red for a 2/2. Sacrifice Goblin, does 2 damage to target creature player. So we've got a lot of kind of, I guess it's not like kind of standard aggro goblins. It's very much almost like burn goblins, like, because we've got all these kinds of things to sacrifice to do indirect damage. And I guess maybe that's the more of the strategy here, rather than attacking with a whole bunch of goblins. But then we've got so many things that benefit goblins attacking. It sort of, I don't know, feels a bit at odds with itself, maybe. I don't know. We've got single Aki Coalflinger, 1 and double red for a 2/2 with first strike, and you pay 1 red and tap to give all your attacking creatures first strike turn. Pretty good. One of the few good goblins from Kamigawa block. Obviously, Kiki-Jiki being the king of them all. But yeah, I always thought this was pretty fun. Like 3 mana for a 2/2 with first strike that can 1 red mana to give your whole like attacking board first strike is pretty solid, honestly. The elf deck doesn't really have an answer to that because they obviously haven't got any first strike because they're mono green. So yeah, that's pretty cool, I think. I lied about tokens. We've got 2 Mog War Marshal, which makes tokens. So 1 red for a 1/1 has Echo for 1 red. So you have to pay the Echo cost at the start of the next upkeep after you've played him. Otherwise, he dies. So when he comes to play or he dies, it makes a Goblin creature token. So yeah, that's pretty good. Like one little guy here making two tokens, I think is okay. It's kind of like a staggered dragon fodder, I suppose. This is what I think they need to be like 3, maybe even 4 of. But yeah, it's nice that it's in here. And then a single Skirk Shaman, 1 and double red for a 2/2. Can't be blocked by artifact creatures and or red creatures, which basically means it's unblockable against the elf deck. So this is okay. It's just going to keep sneaking through and hitting for 2, so that's okay. 3 Goblin Cohort, and again, this is probably saying I wouldn't have put 3 of these in here. 1 red mana for a 2/2. So it's a 2/2 for 1 red mana, which at the time was, that's notable. Even now, that's probably like notable in a way. And it can't attack unless you've played a creature spell this turn, which the whole deck is pretty much creature spells. So this could like attack fairly regularly, I suppose, but I think I would have liked something maybe a little bit more reliable, but it is, like I guess it's a 1 mana 2/2, but like when you're against elves, like that's not that's not notable, because the elves are obviously so efficient themselves. And then 2 Raging Goblins, classic Raging Goblin, 1 Revenge for 1/1 haste. Would have liked 3 of these instead of the Goblin cohort. Right, and then the few non-creature spells we've got. So we've got 3 Tarfire, which is basically Shock, but it has the Goblin subtype for the things that care about Goblin synergies. We've got single Spitting Earth. 1 red does damage equal to the number of mountains you control type creature. Obviously playing mono red, so we've got a whole bunch of mountains. So this can be really, really efficient for only 2 mana. And then 2 Boggart Shenanigans, 2 in a red for a Goblin enchantment. Whenever another Goblin you control dies, it does 1 damage to target player. So, we've got a whole bunch of like sacrifice effects. We've got 2 of these, which is really nice. So again, this is another way of just chipping down the opponent with just, when Goblins die, you do extra damage to them. So yeah, I think that's sort of okay. And then lands, single Goblin Burrows, gives you colourless, or you can pay 1 in red and tap it to give a Goblin +2/+0 center, which is pretty nice coming off a land. That's okay. Quite a few Goblins, obviously in the deck, really appreciate just that. Having that floating buff there, always there as an option, is really nice. Single Forgotten Cave for a bit of cycling, and then 22 Mountains. So, I'm not overwhelmed by the Goblin deck. I think it's okay. There's like a few good stuff in there. I think it's missing a few critical things, and this is the one case I think with the dual decks where sometimes I might do this kind of what could have been. I'm not going to do it with all of them, but in this case, what I think this deck could have benefited from is maybe like some more Goblins with evasion, like Goblin Balloon Brigade, which the Elf deck doesn't have a lot of ways of dealing with because there wasn't a lot of reach in that deck. So this maybe stuff like this could have been nice. There's not that many obviously Goblins with flying, but maybe that could have been here. I think also what it could have really benefited for is just a bunch of like sweeper spells. Because Skirk Fire Marshal doesn't count, because that is 1 card that also needs like at least 4 other Goblins out for it to work. I think it just needs stuff like Pyroclasm, because that's the real threat against the Elf deck, is that they've got so many ways of making creature tokens, and I don't think, and I know for a fact that the Goblin deck can't keep up with it. They've got no way of kind of reliably clearing the board out of like the Elf tokens that start getting really, really out of hand. So what I'm going to do at the end of each of these dual decks after I look at them is kind of like basically pick the deck, pick the faction that I prefer, that I think is maybe the better of the 2. In this case, I think it's pretty solidly the Elf deck. I just think like the cards in there are generally better. I think there's a more kind of coherent strategy there of just like a bunch of tokens and attack with them. Whereas this Goblin one, I don't know, it's because I have played these 2 decks against each other, years ago with friends. The Elf deck most of the time won, just because it was so hard. It very quickly reached a point where the Goblins could not keep up. Like there wasn't maybe enough burn, or like the burn that is there relies on sacrificing creatures, which then you haven't got creatures to block all the Elves that are attacking. I say there's not like enough sweep effects really to clear out all the Elf tokens. So yeah, in this regard, I think the Elf deck is the better of the 2, is the better duelist out of the dual deck. But I'd love to know what you think about this deck. Not only like the Goblin deck, but the project overall. Like, did you have it? Did you play it? Do you agree with me in the Elf deck being better? Was your experience different? Did the Goblins win more? Do you think there are cards that either deck could have used instead? Stick a comment below if you've got any thoughts or stories or comments or opinions, anything like that. Hope you enjoyed this first look at the dual decks. Obviously, we're going to push on with these. So in the next one, we'll look at Jace versus Chandra, which is the first Planeswalker one. So I hope you join me for that. But until then, thanks for watching and listening, and have a great day.